You wake up one morning and something feels wrong. Not wrong in the way a headache feels wrong or the way a bad dream lingers. This is different, deeper. You open your eyes and realize that the things which once filled you with light, the morning coffee you savored, the music that used to move you, the conversations that sparked something alive inside, all of it now feels distant, muted, as if someone turned down the volume on your entire existence and forgot to turn it back up. You go through the motions. You smile when you're supposed to smile. You laugh when others laugh. But inside, there's a hollowness you can't name. The joy you once felt, the simple pleasure of being alive, has quietly slipped away. And what terrifies you most is that you don't know when it left or how to call it back. You try to convince yourself it's temporary. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you need a vacation. Maybe you just need to push through. But deep down, you know this isn't about rest or distraction. Something fundamental has shifted. The world hasn't changed. You have. And now you're standing in the center of your own life, feeling like a stranger watching everyone else experience something you can no longer reach. If this is you, if you've been carrying this quiet emptiness and wondering what's happening to you, then listen carefully, because what you're experiencing isn't a failure of your spirit. It's not a sign that you're broken or weak or losing your mind. What's happening to you is your soul speaking, and it's using the only language it has left when words no longer work. The disappearance of joy. You're not dying, you're waking up. And Dostoevsky understood this moment better than almost anyone who ever lived, because he spent his entire life writing about people who lost their joy, people who felt exactly what you're feeling now, that strange, terrible numbness that settles over the heart when the soul can no longer pretend, when it can no longer participate in the shallow performances the world demands, when it finally says, enough, I cannot live like this anymore. You think something is wrong with you. Dostoevsky would tell you that something is finally right, that your soul has grown too honest to continue feeding itself on illusions, too awake to keep pretending that surface pleasures can satisfy the depths you've reached. What you call the loss of joy, he would call the beginning of your real life. Most people never understand what joy actually is. They confuse it with pleasure, with excitement, with the brief rush of getting what they want or avoiding what they fear. They think joy is what happens when circumstances align, when the right person says yes, when the achievement arrives, when the pain goes away. But Dostoevsky saw through this. He understood that what most people call joy is really just relief. Relief from hunger, relief from loneliness, relief from the constant gnawing sense that something is missing. You feel good not because you've found something real, but because for a moment, the ache stops. This is why joy built on circumstances always collapses, because circumstances change. People leave, achievements lose their shine, the things you thought would complete, you reveal themselves as temporary bandages on a wound that never actually healed. And then you're left with the truth that you were never chasing joy at all. You were running from emptiness. Dostoevsky wrote about this in almost every novel he created. His characters, Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, the Underground Man, Prince Myshkin in The Idiot, all of them experienced this same collapse. They reached a point where the old ways of feeling alive stopped working, where pleasure turned hollow, where success felt meaningless, where even love couldn't penetrate the strange fog that had settled over their hearts. And in every case, Dostoevsky showed that this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning, the moment when the false self started to dissolve so the true self could finally emerge. When you lose the capacity for shallow joy, your soul isn't abandoning you. It's rejecting the life that was never truly yours. It's saying no to the performances, the pretending, the constant effort to be someone you're not. For years, maybe decades, you've been living according to other people's definitions of happiness. You pursued what you were told would make you complete. You built a life that looked good from the outside. You followed the script, and for a while, it worked. Or at least you convinced yourself it worked. But the soul doesn't lie forever. Eventually, it withdraws its energy from anything that isn't genuine. It stops cooperating with the illusion. It refuses to light up for experiences that don't touch your depths. And when this happens, the world doesn't change. You do. You start to see that the joy you thought you had was really just distraction dressed up as meaning. That the relationships you valued were often performances of connection rather than true intimacy. That the accomplishments you chased were ways of proving your worth to people whose opinions never actually mattered. Dostoevsky called this the moment of terrible clarity, the moment when you see your life as it actually is, not as you've been pretending it is. And this clarity feels like death, because in a sense, it is. The death of illusion, the death of the false self, the death of the comfortable story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what will make you happy. This is why losing joy feels so frightening, because it's not just an emotion disappearing, it's your entire way of being in the world collapsing, and your mind panics because it doesn't know what comes next. It only knows what's dying. It can't yet see what's being born. But Dostoevsky understood that this death is necessary, that transformation requires dissolution, that before you can become who you're meant to be, you have to let go of who you've been pretending to be. In The Brothers Karamazov, he wrote about how suffering breaks open the heart in ways that pleasure never can, how pain burns away everything that isn't essential, leaving only what's true. Your loss of joy is this burning, this breaking open, this stripping away. And yes, it's terrifying, but it's also sacred, because on the other side of this emptiness lies something you've never experienced before. Not the shallow joy of getting what you want, but the deep peace of becoming who you are. There are different ways this loss of joy manifests, and Dostoevsky explored all of them. Some people experience it as complete numbness, a kind of emotional flatness where nothing moves them anymore. Not beauty, not kindness, not even suffering. They feel like ghosts, walking through life, present but not really here. Others experience it as exhaustion, not physical tiredness, but a bone-deep weariness of the soul, a sense that they've been performing for so long that there's nothing left inside, no energy for pretending, no strength for maintaining the masks they've worn. Still others feel it as emptiness, a vast, hollow space inside their chest where something vital used to live. They search desperately for what's missing, trying new hobbies, new relationships, new experiences, hoping to fill the void. But nothing works because they're looking outside for something that can only be found within. And then there are those who experience it as a kind of profound sadness, not for any specific reason they can name, but just a general grief, a mourning for the life they thought they were living, but never actually were, a sorrow for all the years spent chasing things that didn't matter while ignoring the depths that did. Dostoevsky knew all these forms intimately because he lived them. After his mock execution and years in Siberian prison, he returned to the world a different man. The shallow pleasures that once satisfied him meant nothing. The social performances he'd engaged in felt absurd. He'd touched something in that darkness, in that confrontation with death and meaninglessness, that changed him forever. He could no longer pretend, could no longer participate in the comfortable illusions that kept everyone else content. And this made him lonely, isolated, different, but it also made him real. He emerged from that experience with a capacity for depth that most people never develop, a willingness to look directly at suffering, at emptiness, at the darkest corners of the human soul without flinching. And this is what he offers you now, not a way to get your old joy back, because that would be returning to the prison you finally escaped, but a way to move through this darkness into something truer, something that doesn't depend on circumstances, something that can survive even in suffering. The first thing you must understand is that your soul is not crying for help because it wants to be rescued. It's crying for help because it wants to be heard. For so long, you've been drowning out its voice with noise, with busyness, with the constant pursuit of things that didn't matter. You filled every silence with distraction because you were afraid of what you might hear if you stopped. But the soul is patient. It waits, and when it can no longer be ignored, when its whispers haven't worked, it does the only thing it can. It withdraws. It takes away the joy you were using to avoid yourself, not to punish you, but to get your attention, to say, please, stop running. Please stop pretending. Please come home to what's real. This withdrawal of joy is an invitation to finally sit with yourself, to finally ask the questions you've been avoiding. What am I really hungry for? What have I been pretending not to know? What life am I actually meant to live? These questions terrify you because you don't know the answers, because answering them might require you to change everything, to let go of relationships that no longer serve your truth, to abandon paths you've invested years in walking, to disappoint people whose approval you've been desperately seeking. But Dostoevsky would tell you that this terror is the gateway, that on the other side of these questions lies your actual life, not the life you inherited or the life others expected, but the life that's genuinely yours. In Notes from Underground, he wrote about a man who spent his entire existence performing for an invisible audience, caring desperately about what others thought, while his own soul withered from neglect. The underground man's tragedy wasn't his suffering, it was his refusal to face what the suffering was revealing, his determination to blame everyone else for his emptiness, rather than looking at the choices he'd made, the truth he'd avoided, the life he'd betrayed. You are not the underground man. You're reading this, which means some part of you is ready to look, ready to listen to what your soul is trying to tell you, ready to walk through this darkness instead of running from it. And this readiness, even if it feels like weakness, is actually the beginning of your strength. The soul that can face its own emptiness is the soul that can be filled with something real. The heart that can admit it's been living a lie is the heart that can finally begin to live truthfully. So, what does the soul actually want from you? What is this loss of joy pointing you toward? Dostoevsky's answer is both simple and terrifying. Your soul wants you to stop lying. Stop lying about what matters. Stop lying about what you feel. Stop lying about who you are and what you need. Stop lying about the relationships that drain you and the work that kills something inside you with every passing day. Stop lying about being fine when you're not fine. Stop lying about being happy when you're empty. Your whole life has been built on small compromises, tiny betrayals of your own truth. You said yes when you meant no. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You stayed when you needed to leave. You pursued what others valued instead of what called to your depths. And each of these compromises seemed small at the time, manageable, necessary, but they accumulated. They built a life that looks like yours from the outside, but feels foreign from the inside. A life where you're the main character of someone else's story. And now your soul is refusing to cooperate anymore. It's taking away the energy you need to maintain these lies. It's stripping away the joy you used as anesthesia against your own awareness. It's forcing you to feel the weight of every betrayal, every compromise, every moment you chose comfort over truth. This is why the loss of joy feels so absolute, because it's revealing how absolutely you've been living outside yourself, how thoroughly you've abandoned your own depths in favor of surface performances. But here is what most people miss. This revelation isn't a punishment. It's a gift, because you can't heal what you can't see. You can't change what you're still pretending is fine. The emptiness you're feeling is your soul showing you the truth, showing you how much of your life has been spent maintaining appearances instead of living authentically. And yes, this truth is painful, but it's also liberating, because once you see the cage, you can finally begin to open the door. Dostoevsky believed that real transformation only happens when we stop trying to escape our suffering and instead turn toward it. When we ask what it's teaching us, what it's revealing about the life we've been living and the life we're meant to live. Your loss of joy is suffering, but it's suffering with a purpose. It's the darkness before a new dawn, the dissolution before a new form, the death that makes resurrection possible. The path forward isn't about reclaiming your old joy. It's about discovering something deeper than joy, something Dostoevsky called peace in suffering, the capacity to be at rest with yourself even when circumstances are difficult, even when you're not getting what you want, even when the world isn't cooperating with your plans. This peace doesn't come from achieving or acquiring. It comes from aligning, from bringing your outer life into harmony with your inner truth, from finally living as the person you actually are instead of the person you thought you should be. And this alignment requires brutal honesty. It requires you to look at every area of your life and ask, is this mine? Is this relationship genuine? Or is it a performance? Is this work meaningful? Or is it just a way to avoid facing what I'm actually called to do? Is this version of me real? Or is it a costume I've been wearing for so long, I forgot it wasn't my skin? These questions will shake your foundations. Some of what you discover will hurt. You'll realize how much time you've wasted, how many years you've spent building someone else's dream, how many moments of genuine connection you've missed because you were too busy maintaining appearances. But you'll also discover something extraordinary beneath all the compromises, beneath all the performances, beneath all the lies you've been telling yourself. There's still you, the real you, the one who got buried under expectations and obligations and fears. That self hasn't disappeared. It's been waiting. And now, in this emptiness, in this loss of a false joy, it finally has space to breathe, to speak, to emerge. Dostoevsky wrote that suffering is the sole origin of consciousness, that we only truly wake up when we can no longer sleep, when the comfortable illusions shatter and we're forced to see reality as it is. Your loss of joy is this shattering, this waking up, this consciousness emerging. And consciousness is painful because it sees what unconsciousness protected you from seeing, but it's also the only thing that can set you free. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you know what you've been avoiding, you can't unknow it. And this knowledge, this terrible, beautiful clarity, gives you a choice you've never really had before. The choice to finally live truthfully or to keep pretending, to honor what your soul is crying for or to silence it with new distractions, to walk through this darkness into your real life or to run back to the familiar cage. You are standing at a threshold. On one side is everything you've known, the comfortable performances, the shallow pleasures, the life that looks good but feels empty. On the other side is the unknown, the honest life, the aligned life, the life that might not look impressive to others, but feels true to you. Crossing this threshold requires courage, not the courage of dramatic gestures or heroic acts, but the quiet courage of small daily choices, the courage to say no when you've always said yes, the courage to disappoint people who expect you to stay the same, the courage to let relationships end when they're no longer genuine, the courage to pursue what calls to you even when it doesn't make sense to anyone else. This is the courage Dostoevsky wrote about in every book, the courage to be yourself in a world that rewards conformity, the courage to suffer consciously rather than sleep comfortably, the courage to choose truth over peace, meaning over pleasure, depth over distraction. And here is what he promises you. If you have this courage, if you walk through this darkness, instead of running from it, you will find something on the other side that shallow joy could never give you. You'll find yourself, not the version you constructed to please others or the version you thought you should be, but your actual self, the one that's been buried and waiting and calling out through the only language it had left, the disappearance of joy. You'll find relationships that are real because they're chosen freely, not maintained out of obligation. You'll find work that matters because it aligns with your depths, not just your bank account. You'll find a way of being in the world that feels like coming home after years of wandering in foreign lands. And most importantly, you'll find a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a groundedness that can weather storms, a capacity to sit with yourself in silence and feel not emptiness, but fullness, not absence, but presence, not death, but life, real life, your life, the one you were always meant to live. This is what your soul has been crying for, not rescue from the outside, but recognition from within, not someone to save you, but your own willingness to finally save yourself by telling the truth, by choosing alignment, by having the courage to let the false life die so the true one can be born. Dostoevsky spent his entire career writing love letters to people like you, People standing in the darkness, wondering if they'll ever feel joy again. And his answer was always the same: you will, but it won't be the joy you lost. It will be something deeper, something truer, something that can only be found by walking through this emptiness instead of running from it, by listening to what your soul is crying for instead of silencing it with distractions, by finally choosing yourself. So if you recognize yourself in these words, if you've been carrying this quiet emptiness and wondering what it means, I want you to know this. You're not broken. You're not failing. You're not losing your mind or your spirit or your capacity for life. You're waking up, and waking up is painful because it means seeing clearly for the first time, seeing what you've been avoiding, seeing what needs to change, seeing who you actually are beneath all the masks. But this pain is not punishment. It's transformation. It's your soul finally getting your attention, finally being heard, finally leading you home to the life that's genuinely yours. Trust it. Follow it. Even when it's terrifying, because Dostoevsky's promise, born from his own descent into darkness and emergence into light, is that on the other side of this emptiness lies everything you've been searching for, not outside yourself, but within. Tell me in the comments which part of this message found you. Which truth did you recognize in yourself? Your story might be the light someone else needs to keep walking through their own darkness. And if you want to continue exploring these depths, these truths that Dostoevsky understood so profoundly, subscribe for more reflections on the soul's journey from emptiness to authenticity, from performance to presence, from shallow joy to deep peace. Thank you for being here, for having the courage to listen, for trusting that your soul's cry for help is actually a call toward your truest life.